Well, I first came to Kansas City in 1980, and my daughter didn't start to attend school in probably till 83 or 84. And so I got engaged then just as a parent, being involved. And then my organization, the National Black United Front, had an initiative that started in 1985 around the question of multicultural education and education of inclusion. And it started out of an event that took place in Portland, Oregon, where you had a desegregation effort going on. And as part of that, the only elementary school that had a majority African American population and had historic roots in the community was going to be closed. And so the struggle came for, well, if we're going to disperse our children, we want them to still have a sense of purpose and who they are. And with a demonstrations that took place by our local organization there in the community, they came up with this question of having baseline essays and multicultural education. Before that, no one was even talking about that. And out of that, that movement sparked attention around the country. And so here we were in Kansas City facing a very similar situation, a desegregation program going on, a disruption within the community. And we were looking for a way of making sure that our children, in terms of who they are, their potential, their history, their culture, wasn't going to be just kind of lost in the politics and in the shuffle of the school district. So I became engaged at that time, and now we're talking probably 1985, 1986 in a very active way. As you recall, Kansas City started with a concept of trying to have a regional solution that even spilled over into other school districts outside of Kansas City, Missouri, and that was thrown out, and it was brought down to a more narrow focus of how this situation was going to be managed. And at that point, integration became a question of attracting white students back into the Kansas City School District, and in so doing, offering plans, programs, initiatives, themes that were basically designed to attract parents, white parents, to bring their children into the Kansas City School District. So Kansas City took that approach to it, and I don't think that was the original goal, but that's how it started. And with that, a host of contradictions and confusions happened in that process.
And what were some of those contradictions and confusions that you would?
Well, first of all, the children who were the adjudicated victims of segregation became at the end of the line again. In other words, we had children who were being, white children who were being bussed in and cabbed into the Kansas City School District. We had their parents making decisions on whether or not the school was going to be classical Greek or Latin grammar or any of those. And our children essentially were on waiting lists. They were waiting to see if enough white parents would send their children to the school district, 40%, before they could even get in. So there was that 60-40 split. Now, at that time, as you recall, it wasn't that you would just say if there are 100 seats, you're going to put 60 African-American children in, and you would wait to see if you could fill up to 40. That wasn't the case. You had to do it throughout the process. So if there were 10, it would have to be 6 and 4. And so many of our parents would, and I was experiencing this personally, I lived right down the street from Pinkerton Elementary School. When it became a magnet school, we had to wait. We didn't know if our daughters were going to be able to go back there. We had to wait to see what their ratio count was going to be. So we had that as one situation of frustration. And then it happened on some other levels, I think, that were many people may have missed. The concept of, and I believe the miss was, we thought integration was a goal as opposed to a means to an end. So we lost sight of that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that if you remind me. But what was happening in the process is that principals were getting an understanding, school leaders, and sometimes even up to the upper administrators, that you couldn't do anything that might discourage white parents from bringing their kids in the school district. So let me tell you some of the examples of what happened. There was a move to not celebrate Dr. King's Day. Because there was this feeling that if you celebrated Dr. King's Day, it would be focusing it on an African American, and white students would feel uncomfortable, so we wouldn't do that. There was schools that stopped celebrating Black History Month. And the same thing, in fact, they said, well, let's not call it Black History Month, let's just call it Brotherhood Month. And I remember Walter Marks, as superintendent, having this sent out a directive to all principals saying we will celebrate Dr. King's birthday, we will celebrate Black History Month with its integrity intact. Now remember, students at Lincoln High School walked out, and students at Van Horn walked out, and East walked out, and even at Southeast because of these contradictions that were at play. So what you had was these students where they were the victims of segregation, without a doubt, and they were being victimized again by a process that I think got very heavily focused on integration as a goal, as opposed to a means to an end. Integration, if you think of integration as a destination, as a goal, we didn't contribute very much to it at all. If you think of it as a means to an end, and that is to making sure that all children, particularly African American children, receive an education that would empower them, that would give them a sense of mission and purpose, we contributed to that, I would say, significantly. More so than schools that actually met their desegregation quota and had their racial balance they were looking for. Because in those schools, our students were, they were bit players. They were the ones who were receiving the benefits. They weren't the ones with agency. They were just following along, and it was for the others that were being brought in. So I guess we would have done very little, but hopefully we did a lot to get people to realize that it really was, historically was, and should have been merely just a means to an end. So in other words, you could get to a point and you could say, well, desegregation failed in Kansas City. But the next question, or the first question anyone should ask you is, but how did the children do? Were they educated? Were the parents happy with the product we had? So it could be reversed. And you and I both know parents who have sent their children outside of the Kansas City School District in schools that were African Americans, a very small percentage of the population, high performing schools, and their children do poorly and feel bad about themselves. Now you can brag and say, well, my daughter went to a prestigious school. But if your daughter finished that school not wanting to go any further, or feeling bad about themselves, or feeling disconnected from their own community, then the battle was lost.